welcome to the Mobilize and Restore webinar series, and thanks to those who have continued on from the research part. In this portion of the webinar, our speaker, Melissa Boswell, will share how to use Sit2Stand for your own data collection, implement their analysis pipelines, or processing and analysis pipelines, and she will conclude with best practices and pitfalls of conducting large-scale digital studies. And again, we'll take more questions at the end of the tutorial. So again, use the Q&A panel and not the chat. And again, feel free to enter the questions as she is talking. So with that, Melissa, please feel free to go ahead and start the tutorial.
All right, sounds good. Okay, well, hi again to everyone who's still on, and thank you and welcome to those who may be just joining. Does everything look okay, Matt?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay. Okay, awesome. So as Matt mentioned, now we're going to be discussing the implementation of Sit2Stand.ai, as well as some digital study best practices and potential pitfalls, which I've outlined here. And before we do that, though, I just wanted to give a quick summary in case people are just joining now. So in our study, we developed a mobile and self-guided biomechanical assessment of the Sit2Stand test. We deployed it in a nationwide study where close to 500 people collected videos of the Sit2Stand test at home using their smartphones and uploaded to our platform Sit2Stand.ai, which automatically analyzed the videos for timing and kinematic parameters. And then we found that these at-home recordings contain signals predictive of the presence of osteoarthritis and other health measures, and that kinematics in particular were more predictive than timing alone. And overall, the study shows that digital biomechanical analyses are possible and can be implemented into future studies, hopefully as an objective digital marker of health and functioning. And I'm going to share just how that implementation works now. So there are two different pathways for implementing Sit2Stand.ai. The first is directly through our web application. So using our web app doesn't require any coding knowledge, and we have a few levels of output detail, which I'll share. And then the second pathway of implementation is to clone our GitHub repo, where you can then edit and execute our backend Python processing code in a Jupyter notebook. And you can find the links to our GitHub on Sit2Stand.ai, as well as in our manuscript. So I'll start with the web app pipeline. So when you go to Sit2Stand.ai, there is a button here to assess the Sit2Stand test videos. And when you click on that, there are two options. And I switched to a smartphone here because I think to me, it intuitively maybe makes more sense to do the self-assessments or single video through a phone. And then the batch processing sort of researcher pipeline on the web page. You can use either one, but I just wanted to share that these different options were available. So after selecting the self-assessment, an individual will get the instruction video as well as written instructions on how to perform the test. And then there's this button here to do a single video upload. And then after the video is uploaded and also approved by the individual, it is processed, and then the video with pose estimation is overlaid on top of the video is returned to the participant. And then the total time, the trunk acceleration and trunk flexion are reported back as results. And so these are the metrics that were validated in the manuscript and kind of what we term like basic outputs that an individual will get through this pipeline. And just for some additional information on this, the total time is calculated assuming 5 repetitions. So if fewer than 5 repetitions are detected, we calculate the average time per repetition and then multiply that by 5. And then the trunk flexion is determined by the forward trunk lean compared to the vertical axis of the camera frame. And then the trunk acceleration is a double discrete derivative of the trunk angle. And trunk flexion and acceleration are reported as the average of the maximum flexion and acceleration over all cycles. And we talked a little bit more about this in part 1. So that section is also there for reference to better understand how we calculated these parameters. So this is what it looks like from the self-assessment side, and this is available right now for use. Again, as we're continuing to work on the app, so and improve its robustness. And I'll share later ways that you can contact us if there are issues. But we're excited that this is available for use. And as I mentioned, there's also another option when going to the assess web page, which is the option for researchers. And this option is for researchers to be able to submit multiple videos, and then you can get a spreadsheet back with results. Right now, when you click on this, you go to a web page that says under construction, because we are currently working on this, but I wanted to share sort of our proposal or a prototype of what we're have built out so far. And I'd be really happy to get your feedback on this to see if it seems like it would be useful, if there's other features or things that would be helpful in this pipeline. So what we're proposing here is a page that looks something like this, where you can choose the outputs that you want, enter your email, where you will be notified when the results are complete, and then you can upload multiple videos through this option here. And so this pipeline would consist of collecting data outside of the web app, and there are multiple ways to do this. I mentioned one earlier, which we're using in our decentralized clinical trial, which is to use another platform to share the instructions, collect videos, and then you can upload them through the web app. Another option is to actually use our website code to create your own website, which you can embed into your own survey flow or edit for what is most useful in your research. So we have a GitHub repo with the web app code, which you can clone and edit directly. There's obviously other ways that you can collect videos. So whether that's in a lab or a clinic, or there's another method that you're using, you can use that as well. These are just some examples of ways that you might be able to use what we already have out there. So as I mentioned before, after these videos are collected, you'll be able to choose multiple videos. They will go into the queue to be processed, and then you'll receive an email when those are ready, and you can select from basic or extended outputs. And again, these the basic outputs are what I mentioned previously, which is timing, trunk flexion, and trunk acceleration. But there's also an option for more of an extended output, which are the metrics that are already in our pipeline, and a much larger spreadsheet, which I'll share a little bit more about what's in there. So for this output, we compute 2D joint angles, again, in the camera projection plane from the right and the left side of the right and left sides of the body. And then this includes the knee, which is the ankle, knee, hip key points, the hip, which is the knee, hip, neck key points, the angles between those, and then the ankle, which is the angle from the first metatarsal to the ankle and knee. We also calculate the angle of the shank with respect to the horizontal, and then trunk flexion or trunk alignment, which I mentioned previously. And then again, we calculate angular velocities and accelerations with the discrete derivatives, dividing them by the frame rate. And then we also calculate a set of different features from these. So we look at the range of these individual parameters, the standard deviation, the absolute minimum across the entire test, absolute maximum, the mean minimum, and the mean maximum. So this is the mean and the max per sit-to-stand cycle, averaged across all of 5 cycles. And then the maximum and minimum standard deviation for each cycle as well. And then we calculate those for the entire sit-to-stand for an entire cycle, as well as breaking the cycle down into just standing to sitting, and then standing to sitting to standing, and then standing to sitting. So you can see that this ends up being quite a large matrix, and you can dive into how these variables are calculated, really like the details of what's being output from the code that we share as well. So again, the video is going to the queue. You receive an email when the results are ready. And this summarizes the pipelines available on the website for self-assessment and for researchers. And again, I'd really love feedback on this, what you think is helpful or ideas for how we might be able to improve upon what we're proposing here. So now I'll share more about how you can edit and execute our backend processing code in a Jupyter notebook. And again, you can find the links to our GitHub repos on Sit2Stand.ai and in our manuscript. So here you'll find our GitHub repo, and I'll just go through the README at a high level, which shares the steps after you clone our repo. So you'll first need to install a Jupyter notebook and requirements, which we provide the code for. And then you can use these first steps are sort of more to be able to replicate our study, where you can we provide the already processed videos, the key points from those processed videos, which you can download and then input into a Python notebook, which then takes these open pose outputs from our study and then detects the number of cycles, the timing, and kinematic parameters, and all the metrics basically that I mentioned in the extended output. And then we also provide our RStudio project to do the basic statistical analyses that replicate the analyses in our manuscript. However, if you would like to use either our videos, our anonymized videos, and process them again, or use your own videos, you can also do that. And to do that, we recommend you can download our videos from Google Drive, or again, you can use your own videos, and then you can change to a different pose estimation algorithm or use open pose and get those key point outputs. And really, we provide after you perform that processing, you can then go back to and input those into the Git metrics Python notebook again to get the metrics that we calculate, or you can edit that code to get the metrics that you want, or if you want to change how they're calculated as well. And I also wanted to mention that on Sit2Stand.ai, there is a contact coordinator button where you can send us a message. You're also free to send us emails to ask questions about any of these pipelines or share feedback. So in summary, we have our web page where you can use our video and instructions or your own and submit the videos through Sit2Stand.ai. You can also embed our web page into your survey flow or update the code for your use. And then we provide the processing pipelines, which runs OpenPose, detects these Sit2Stand parameters, and then you can also use the analysis R code for statistics. And all of these are customizable. So that concludes the implementation portion, and now I'll share some of the best practices and pitfalls that I found in digital biomechanical studies. And I'm going to start with recruitment. And I'll share a little bit more about the challenges with recruitment. But really with these digital studies, it's exciting because we can access a lot of people, but that does open the door for potentially getting what I will call spam submissions to the study. So I'll share what I've learned with that. But in general, I found that it's most helpful to not share directly on social media, and especially not on Reddit or LinkedIn. But instead, sharing on things like email lists, whether that's family or friends or other researchers, or previous study lists. So we were able to collect or have a large number of participants that have osteoarthritis because of previous studies that we've conducted with individuals with knee osteoarthritis, and those who don't qualify but indicate they're willing to be contacted later, we were able to email those individuals. I also recommend paid ads on Facebook or Google. Facebook has worked very well, but it is important to consider sort of the demographics that you're getting from these different platforms. And then, of course, the tried and true method is posting flyers in physical locations, and this kind of depends on your study of interest. So in my current study, we're looking at places like senior centers. I've also found that posting in gyms is a great method as well. But it was exciting, I think, to be able to reach people outside of sort of the local community. I found that it's really important to have balanced payments. So you want your payments for individuals to be incentivizing. I've found that just performing, participating in a study for the sake of benefiting science and research isn't necessarily motivating for everyone. So there needed to be some sort of incentivization, but not high enough where it may be encouraging manipulation or false submissions. And I'm going to share more about that now. So in general, verifying online identities, identity online is becoming increasingly difficult due to the prevalence of fraudulent accounts, in particular when there may be benefits like payment for individuals. And in my experience, people will VPN into the country of the study, and also use different VPNs, so it's more difficult to track. And I think there's a lot more to do to figure this out. But I'll share some of the indicators that you might want to look out for as you're running your study. So first is a large amount of participants, a large influx of participants. So hundreds or thousands overnight. This happened to me where I woke up with hundreds of entries and I was really excited and thought I had finished my PhD overnight. But in fact, that's typically an indication that something is wrong, and you should look further into that. In our study, because we're collecting videos, those were helpful in identifying that. In the case that we would not collect videos, I think that would have been more challenging. But I'll share some of the other indicators beyond videos now to look out for. So one thing is completing the screening survey in an unreasonable amount of time, a very short time, like 1 second per question or something like that. Typically, when there is a spam entries, there'll be a large number of times where an individual did not qualify, and then all of a sudden somebody will qualify, and then you'll see hundreds of entries immediately following that very quickly. Because they've learned sort of the combination of screening when they're able to do that independently. So there's also indicators in email addresses. So this would include multiple entries like tens or hundreds in a row with similar names and email formats, like first name, last name, and then a bunch of numbers at gmail.com or yahoo.com. We'll see names that seem typical, but with a bunch of letters added at the end, name to email spelling errors. So here you see Will Ames, and then here it's Williams. So this is very subtle, but these are the types of things that we're seeing, as well as names that maybe don't necessarily make sense. And name to emails that are not correct. So here, for example, Alan Storm, and then the email is Tammy Brittany, and then gibberish emails. So just a bunch of letters or a bunch of numbers. You can also look at the signature, and we found that the spam entries tend to have sort of an interesting signature, or like we'll just have the first name printed or something like that. So here are just some things to look out for. Hopefully we can, digital studies in general will start to make some progress in how we can ensure that the participants are authentic, but there is more to do there. We found that using a reCAPTCHA is helpful, but again, these aren't necessarily robots. These could be real people. So I have colleagues who are implementing an ID check in their studies where individuals upload a picture of their ID, as well as asking some of the same questions at baseline and follow up with details such as like a zip code and phone number, or a doctor's name, things that if people are entering very quickly, they might not remember what they had put previously. So trying to match those up. Again, all these introduce friction into the process, especially uploading a picture of an ID, which would also increase, the barrier to with the ethics board, as well as people might not feel as comfortable doing that. But these are some ideas and ways to ensure that people will not fraudulently enroll. So it's really exciting to see that we can access so many people, share our studies so broadly. But this is really a big thing that I think we need to look out for. I wanted to share, there was a question earlier on how the videos that we used or excluded. So again, this was a manual process that we did in terms of processing, in terms of cleaning the data. So videos that were processed with OpenPose, we had about 80 that we did not include. And so some reasons for that, again, I mentioned that the most common reason that we removed videos was they were taken at either entirely the frontal or sagittal planes. Individuals, we talked about chair use. Some individuals use a very heavily cushioned chair, which they really sink into, and it also obstructs the view of the participants. So we removed those. Individuals who we asked participants to keep their arms crossed in front of them for consistency. So we removed ones where people use their arms to push off of their legs or the chair. We removed videos where there was an obstruction or the participant was out of the frame. And then an unnaturally slow speed. And for this, we did this before all our analyses, but it is a little bit tricky still. But we excluded participants who, for example, took a large break in between the test, or didn't seem to understand that the test was supposed to be as fast as possible. And so this is something that we try to emphasize more in future studies. So as I mentioned, we got feedback when in the study, but before launching the study, we had a very iterative process where initially we tested the app just with the co-authors, and then we expanded that to a testing within our lab, and then we expanded that to a friends and family test. And we received feedback, and each of these continued to iterate the code, our app. And I think this testing phase is really important before launching into a larger study. It is important with any study to do some pilot testing, but particularly in studies where you're going to be collecting data from hundreds or thousands of people, it's great to really make sure your methods are as robust as possible. And then we asked for feedback in the study. So we asked participants how easy or difficult they found to complete it. But these are participants who did complete the study, so it's likely biased towards that. We asked for open-ended qualitative feedback. And we received feedback on the experience, on the instructions, and the technology in general. And we found that people really enjoyed being able to do a study like this from home. And we got feedback on how to improve the test instructions and ideas for making it the tool more accessible for different personal preferences. I just wanted to end here with some additional references that may be helpful. So Rochester et al. Recently released a paper on the challenges and opportunities for remotely evaluating movement disorders. Jennifer Hicks and colleagues wrote a paper on best practices for analyzing large-scale health data from wearables and smartphone apps. And then CTTI has a broad suite of recommendations and resources to help design and run successful fit-for-purpose digital health trials. And so I think when running a digital biomechanics assessment, there are some specific things related to biomechanics that we can consider, but I think there's also a wealth of information available from digital trials that we can use to make our studies as good as possible. So this concludes the second part of this webinar, and I'm happy to take any questions. I again wanted to thank co-authors and funding for making this work possible, and I'm excited for the discussion following now.
Great, thank you, Melissa. So now we'll go ahead and switch back to the questions. We'll try to focus on ones that came in during the tutorial, and then if we have time, we'll try to circle back to the ones that came in earlier. So let's see, the first question comes from Corey Rovzar. How far are we from being able to also capture gait kinematics from one's smartphone? Do you think something like a timed up and go test would be possible with a single camera?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of that depends on the question that you want to answer with the test. It's possible to record that test and run through a similar pipeline, but obviously the metrics at the end would be more test dependent. It also is a little bit more challenging to do activities with one camera that may take up more space. But Łukasz Kaczynski, for example, he developed a tool that could assess gait for children with cerebral palsy from a single camera. I think there's definitely opportunity to do that in other activities.
Question from George Folk. He's saying you may want to consider creating an additional pipeline for rehabilitation professionals like PTs, because it could be good for home care and rehab settings. So maybe I guess to put that into a question, if a PT was interested in potentially using this for their own research, which pipeline would you say is the best to start? Like going to the website or whatever, what analysis pipeline may be best for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think right now the self-assessment tool could be really useful because you can also give feedback to the participant. And you can sort of do that within a couple minutes. And then you can also show the participant, the patient, for example, how to use that pipeline as you're using it. And then they can go to the website at home and do that by themselves. Yeah, without the help of the clinician.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I had a few questions, maybe just to clarify on in terms of looking at the kinematics were calculated in the plane of the camera. A few questions were asking how does that relate to the sagittal plane angles within the OpenSim model. I think you mentioned that you did consider combining both the sagittal trunk flexion and then also some in the medial lateral movement as well. So I don't know, maybe an extra clarification on how that was resolved between the two.
Yeah, so I guess exactly as you mentioned, we considered because it was at a 45-degree angle, we're likely capturing both like frontal and sagittal plane kinematics. And so we did use both the lumbar bending and flexion from motion capture to compare to the projected angle for the 2D kinematics from video. That being said, if you're only interested in sagittal kinematics, you can also just take the video from a sagittal plane and upload that through the pipeline, and the same processing is going to occur. But you can just know that how you're and you can do the same thing from the frontal plane, I guess, as well. So it will just depend on what's most beneficial for your study, and then just considering that when you're submitting the videos for the pipeline.
Yeah. Another question from Brandon Peoples. First of all, it says fantastic job. He had two questions. Beside the spam emails, did you also notice any duplicate video uploads from spam or authenticated users? So maybe from multiple users. And then if you don't mind sharing what financial incentives the participants did end up receiving.
Yeah. So great question. And we definitely received duplicates. We didn't, some individuals, it actually, just seemed like an accident that they submitted multiple videos. Yeah. And that's fine. We saw more, I would say, of the spam ones were actually not necessarily duplicate videos, but we could tell they were not from the United States, and the survey questions were all answered like extremely quickly, and it seemed by the same individual. So there is like some nuance in that, but I'm trying to think what was the second part of the question.
Oh, sorry. What financial incentive?
Oh, the financial, yes. Yeah. So for our study, so initially we tried to do more of a lottery incentive where we had a larger, I think it was like $100 gift card or something like that, where that like 10 people would win, and that didn't seem to be enough of an incentive to people. So then we were offering individual gift cards for participation at $30. I think that was a little bit high. I don't necessarily think that it would require that much. I think it really depends though. Like the survey that we had was quite long. because we captured a lot of health measures that actually took significantly larger than the Sit2Stand test. So if you wanted to, reduce the time and effort that participants needed, you could also then I think kind of match the compensation accordingly.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. So thank you again, Melissa, for a great talk and tutorial. Awesome tool. It's always great to hear the results. And thank you for everyone, to everyone for the great questions that have come in. Please be sure to click on the link that will appear at the end of at the conclusion of the webinar and take our survey. That'll help us improve the webinar series and choose upcoming topics. Again, this webinar series is supported by 2 grants from the NIH, including the grants that support our Mobilize and Restore centers. We're grateful for the support, which allows us to run these webinars and other events. And we want to thank everyone again for participating. We hope you'll continue to stay involved with our centers, and we'll see you again in a future webinar. Have a great rest of your day.